Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Liberty Hub Defending the West. Here's something you probably didn't know. As the populist conservative movement continues to grow and expand in the age of President Trump, a new generation of energized voters and young people will do well to arm themselves with the intellectual firepower of the giants upon whose shoulders today's movement rests. Long before anti-Milo rioters sparked violence at UC Berkeley, a University of Chicago professor named Allan Bloom lit academia ablaze with this 1987 classic, taking the professorate to task for eroding higher education curriculum with progressive pablum. A staunch defender of the classical canon of great works every person must read, Bloom explained how the intellectual corruption of the humanities and arts led to an erasure of students' understanding of the proper moral order that undergirds Western civilization. A study conducted a few years ago shows that radicals rule at University of California. The California Association of Scholars, a division of the National Association of Scholars, have just released an incendiary report showing that all 9 of the University of California's campuses have been compromised by too many politicized courses and radical faculty members. CAS members include a number of current or past professors from the UC system who have taught at UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Santa Cruz, and UC San Diego. Resident conservative Jennifer Rubin at The Washington Post compared the 25th anniversary of the publication of Allan Bloom's groundbreaking The Closing of the American Mind to the release of the new CAS report. She astutely pointed out that, and I quote, "The left systematically has dumbed its side down to the point where supposedly well-educated elites are untrained and unaware of our country's history and constitutional traditions." Well, conservatives have long complained of a strong liberal bias in college classrooms, and this new study shows just how far off track it has gone in one of the most prestigious public university systems in the country. The harsh conclusions drawn by American journalist Dan Gagliasso defines the situation as a preoccupation that is going to take courage, intelligence, and a lot of hard work, and it's not going to happen overnight. Take a long look at this new California Association of Scholars study and vet it yourself. Look things up, ask questions, and talk with your kids, other students, other parents, and family members. And don't be afraid of the far left's intellectual elite. Common sense is a lot more important than Marxist indoctrination, even at a place like the University of California. We will be receiving the most pertinent answers on the matter of the death of the American University from my co-host, Dr. Mihail Neamtu, whom I would like to thank once again for his presence on this show. Hi, Mike.
Hi, it's good to be back, and thank you for this invitation.
Mike, who killed the American University?
That's a very, very important, pertinent question. We live in an age of technology. You know, I carry with me all the time, just like you probably, the iPhone. We've noticed lots of people have smartphones, they have smartwatches, everything they want is just there, but they do not behave like civilized human beings. We've seen the lootings, we've seen the riots, We've seen the lack of respect for great monuments and symbols of national unity in America. So the question is, what makes you a civilized human being? What makes you an educated person? What makes you really part of that culture that deserves the name of culture? So I think the answer to this is an experience of learning about yourself, learning about your ancestors, learning about the society in which you live. Requires patience, requires a certain type of will, commitment. Now, that doesn't really translate into rioting, into the noise of the street. You've got to accept that there are lots of questions for which, when you are a teenager, there's no answer, no explicit or immediate answer. How would you describe the life of the mind in the absence of the big questions? Those who killed the American dream, those who killed the American university are the same. And I'm thinking here particularly of the social justice warriors, of the social organizers. I'm thinking here of the managerial class that seems not to be interested in the big question that made the university possible. What is that question? How does it sound? Well, it's, I think, a very fundamental question for all of us. What is man? Who are we? What is the human condition? What is the purpose of life? How can we improve our human condition from a spiritual perspective? Such questions, for those who are socially engaged in the battle, in the permanent revolution against the past in particular, such questions seem not to be pertinent. So perhaps it's very useful right now to go back to the famous essay, even the book of Allan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind, and to look at the prophetic voice that he clearly was in 1987 when he wrote that wonderful essay. Now, he was a professor at the University of Chicago. He was somebody who at the age of 15 fell in love with philosophy. He understood there are questions that you can ask about the human condition only at a particular time in your life. For instance, when you are 18 years old, you are free of any worldly cares, so to speak. You're not a father, you're not a mother. Still, you are at a very important age when you have a lot of stamina, energy, mental prowess. You have time, which is critical for any kind of inquiry. You are not under the pressure of making money. You are still in a good position to spend 4 years of your life surrounded with books, important books, if possible, the great books, and I would say encouraged by your mentors towards a path of self-discovery. Know thyself, or gnotis eαυτόν in Greek, is the famous word coming from Socrates. Who are you? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of your existence? Is a particular question that one should ask at this very age. Now, if you enter the university, if you step on your college campus with other questions like which group should I enroll, which revolution should I embrace, you are not asking the right question for that particular age, and that's a pity, because 4 years of your life will be gone very soon without you ever confronting or encountering what makes you a human person. What makes you a human being is the capacity to ask questions. What is goodness? What is the truth? What is beauty? Such questions are really deep philosophical questions, and if they are not being asked by the professors, then we are very close to a death of the life of the mind.
Do you think these questions are lacking in the Californian university system, in the UC system?
Not just California, I suppose. I went to the University of Michigan many years ago, 10 years ago, and I found many Trotskyites and Leninists, students being interested, again, in organizing themselves as a social pressure group. If you are interested in the matters or in the questions of power, you are not interested in the ultimate question of human existence. Power is a transient matter. It's not something perennial. Some people stay in power for 10 years, for 20 years. Some groups or political parties are in power for 5 years. So it's obvious that being interested in politics, being interested in power relations is a secondary preoccupation, is a secondary type of interest or reflection than, as I said, the question of beauty, truth, and goodness. If, however, we are losing sight of these great fundamental questions of philosophy, theology, literature, and if we cave in to this pressure coming from the street, what will happen is that we are not just stopping from asking important questions, we are going to refrain ourselves from reading the most important books. So to your question, who killed the American university, my second answer will refer to the absence of a proper, organized, and widely accepted canon of great books which all students should accept. They are mandatory. What happens today is that we are lost, as Allan Bloom put it, in the perversity of diversity. There are lots of things one can do in the university, but what's striking is the absence of a point of reference, of a common point of reference for all students. Students of humanities, Anna, students of natural science, they don't come together around something which is uplifting, which is inspiring, and which has, I would say, a common ground. No, unfortunately, such students of natural sciences and of humanities rarely meet together, rarely talk to each other, and that's, in a sense, again, the death of the university. Why? Because the university is the place where the unity of the human pursuit for knowledge should be evident. Now that's gone. And what we are left with is just perhaps a temporary experience of 3 or 4 years of ideological entertainment, not more than that.
Some put it as being the stupidity and the takeover of the American culture, and according to Breitbart columnist Evan Sayet, half a century ago, a band of leftist thugs violently took over the administration building at Columbia University and hijacked the American education system. From that moment on, they used the system to indoctrinate, in fact, brainwash generations after generation into their cult of leftism, end of quote. It is well known that for the next 5 decades, pseudo-intellectuals hiding behind tenure and academic freedom have been spewing greater and greater nonsense designed for one purpose and one purpose only: sabotaging and eventually destroying all of Western civilization. Do you serve your meat with a side dish of proof? If so, simply consider the fact that one of the most often repeated chants of the modern liberal movement is, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western civilization has to go." With control of the education system, the leftists turned what had been a place of scholarship into a leftism factory, with the curriculum and modus operandi designed to facilitate their utopian dreams, which first required the demolition of the great but imperfect Western world. And it's getting worse. This is why Americans believe we're on the wrong track no matter which party is in power. This is because the first several generations to enter the schools after the coup at Columbia had the opportunity for what journalist Evan Sayet calls residual intelligence, things learned from being in contact with members of the greatest generation and those who come before them. As we moved into the late 70s and early 80s, as those who held true American values began to retire and therefore move out of position of influence, Sayet says that morality became both wider and deeper, so that by 1987, Professor Allan Bloom could write The Closing of the American Mind, his masterpiece detailing the abject stupidity of the students then first entering the universities. Well, I think that it is far from a coincidence that Bloom's book was published in 1987, for that would be almost the very second when the first children of the 60s, the first generation wholly raised by people who came of age in the post-coup era, were beginning to matriculate. How would you comment on that? We see this book is pertaining to subjects that we even devise today and that we discuss today. It's an important piece of literature that every thinking person should read.
Every educated man
should read. But how do we consider it in the schooling and the takeover of the American culture?
The book is very interesting. It's very powerful. It's written again by a philosopher who studied very well the classics. He was fluent in Greek. Allan Bloom was able to translate The Republic, written by Plato, as we all know. He was also a great scholar of Shakespeare and Rousseau. He was somebody who really believed that a beautiful mind, to quote here a famous phrase, a beautiful mind should engage in a conversation, in that perennial conversation which was kept going by the greatest minds of the past. So, Anna, in all seriousness, there are a very limited number of deep questions that one can ask throughout his life. Life is short, even in its longest version, so to speak. So, if life is short, then you have to begin with the most important things in life, not necessarily with the most urgent things in life. It might be urgent for you to make money, says Bloom, but it's more important, to study the classics. Why? Because the classics were those individuals very much able to articulate with precision the questions of human existence, which we, the uneducated, so to speak, are not able to formulate with great precision. What is beauty? Let's go back to this. What is the beautiful? What is virtue? What is courage? How should we confront death? What is the most important legacy of the human life? These are the questions, the philosophical questions, which have been evacuated by the ideologues. Ideologues who are more interested, as I said, in perhaps arguing not in favor of the individual, but in favor of the collective. Once again, we see here a tension. When you are 18, when you are 20, do you want to be yourself? Do you want to have your own thoughts? Do you want to purify your understanding, to clarify your vision, and to come out of the university with clear statements about what you believe and what you don't believe? Or rather, would you just want to be a voice full of slogans, just rioting and attacking others with this sense of passionate involvement in the cosmic, if not social justice war, universal war, and end up like an impoverished soul? Allan Bloom tells us, very importantly I think, in this book, that we have not just bodies to nourish, but souls to feed. Now, what is the food of the human soul? He's asking. And he says, the best food available for us all interested in a good education, is ideas, values, virtues, and books. Unless you spend a lot of time reading the great books, unless you try to converse with Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, Dante Alighieri, Thomas Aquinas, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Dostoevsky, and perhaps today Jordan Peterson, you're not going to be an educated human being. Unfortunately, the leftist revolutionaries, so to speak, don't want you to be an educated individual. They want you to be part of the mob. They want you not to ask questions. They want you to be always joining the crowd that in an unreflective way follows the orders given by the master, by the supreme leader, by the party. And that's, I think, that's a terrible image of what an impoverished soul can look like.
Let's look at how higher education ought to be. Based on the remarks of Noam Chomsky, 2014, to a gathering of members and allies of the Adjunct Faculty Association of the United Steelworker in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. First of all, Noam Chomsky believes that we should put aside any idea that there was once a golden age. Things were different and in some ways better in the past, but far from perfect, says Noam Chomsky. The traditional universities were, for example, extremely hierarchical, with very little democratic participation in decision-making. One part of the activism of the 1960s was to try to democratize the universities, to bring in, say, student representatives to faculty committees, to bring in staff to participate. These efforts were carried forward under student initiatives with some degree of success. Most universities now have some degree of student participation and faculty decisions. And I think those are the kinds of things we should be moving towards: a democratic institution in which the people involved in the institutions, whoever they may be, faculty, students, or staff, participate in determining the nature of the institution and how it runs, says Chomsky. And the same should go for a factory. These are not radical ideas, I should say. They come straight out of the classical liberalism. So if you read, for example, John Stuart Mill, a major figure in the classical liberal tradition, he took it for granted that workplaces ought to be managed and controlled by the people who work in them. That's freedom and democracy. We see the same ideas in the United States. Let's say you go back to the Knights of Labor. One of their stated aims was to establish cooperative institutions such as will tend to supersede the wage system by the introduction of a cooperative industrial system. This idea is almost elementary. It has deep roots in American history and in classical liberalism. It should be second nature to working people, and it should apply the same way to universities. There are some decisions in a university where you don't want to have a democratic transparency because you have the preserved student privacy, say, and there are various kinds of sensitive issues, but on much of the normal activity of the university, there is no reason why direct participation can be not only legitimate, but helpful. In my department, for example, says Chomsky, for 40 years, we've had student representatives helpfully participating in department meetings. Well, Chomsky is a controversial mind, and how would we comment on that? Because we might clash on some ideas against his.
There's nothing wrong in having people participating in all sorts of forums of debate. Obviously, the students have to have a say. when it comes to important decisions regarding the university. There's no question about it. But again, we have to come back to this initial question put forward by Allan Bloom. What is the purpose of the university? And unless we all agree upon the common purpose of students and professors alike, they are all part of the university. Also, the administrators are part of the university. Unless we all agree upon the final cause, in Aristotelian terms, of the university, it will be very, very hard to understand how we should see this participatory aspect of Chomsky's ideas. So I have no objections when it comes to students telling university administrators what kind of food should be served in a cafeteria. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. But I have some questions when it comes to students telling the professors what should be taught and what should not be taught in a given class. Recently, political correctness has eroded this respect for the ancient authors and for the ancient texts. You see even classical writers like Hegel or Kant having books assigned for different classes, and when you open the book as a student, you see a notice here written down that, you know, this university professor, this German philosopher has some racial prejudice and you should read the book cautiously and so on. So there's always a tendency to downgrade, to somehow look in a patronizing fashion at different authors from the past. And I don't think that sense of, patronizing, arrogance is good for a young student. I believe, on the contrary, that the best attitude, the best effective mode, so to speak, in German Befindlichkeit, the best disposition towards the ancient authors would be a disposition dictated by admiration, by even love. One should love somebody in order to better understand somebody. So, the problem with the current colleges in America and also in Europe to some extent is that sense of love, respect, even awe towards the great mentors and thinkers of the past has completely vanished, has gone. So with this egalitarian approach, there's no substantial difference between me and Socrates. Who is Socrates? Who is Plato? What does he have to teach me? That sense of egalitarian envy is corroding and destroying our learning. And that's a big, big problem. Because the very purpose of you being a student is to basically discipline yourself. We have this wonderful, beautiful word in English coming from Latin, discipline. Now, a disciple is somebody who is always ready to get disciplined, to basically enter a world in which he knows there are very strict rules, like, for instance, the rule for writing an essay, the rule for reading a book, requires you not to pay attention to other superficial facts of life. Now, that sense of discipline, askesis in Greek, has gone, and what we have instead is a calling towards all students to participate, to embrace, to even worship new movements against, racism, against all sorts of social causes which have almost nothing to do with the perennial questions of philosophy.
That's very nicely put, and hopefully we can all share the love once again for the university and for education in America and worldwide.
We should also rediscover the love for the books. The books were part and parcel of a normal human life before the advent of secularization. In particular, I'd say the Bible. Technology, on the one hand, is an enemy of this great love for books, because this is the world of distraction which has nothing to do with the life of the mind. Yeah, I mean, the computer, the tablet, or the phone. But apart from technology, as I said, this world of interrupted thoughts, of tweets, of comments, and so on, we have another attack upon the great books coming from the left. And I think the problem with that attack is that they don't really think the books are the depository of wisdom. They think those books, like especially the sacred book, the Bible, are preventing you from embracing the cause of the revolution. So better not read them. That kind of anti-intellectualism is worrisome, and it reminds me of, can I put it this way, in a perhaps polemical fashion, of some Islamic thinkers and leaders of the Middle Ages. Such radical Islamist leaders destroyed lots of books in Alexandria or in Baghdad. Hundreds of manuscripts were gone after the invasion of some radical religious sects. And I think it's worrisome that the same kind of attitude towards the library, towards the ancient texts, towards sacred manuscripts is being displayed today by the leftists.
Thank you, Mike, for today's show. Thank you.
Thank you.